Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. But America's agriculture landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertising campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food to the store where you buy the final product and everything in between. This is Real Ag. From corn to soybeans, government policy to the effects of the pandemic, we have taken a wide look at the world of farmers and producers on this season of Real Ag. We will look back at this season on this episode of Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Hydroponics literally means working water in Greek. And essentially, the whole setup of growing hydroponically is the principle of replacing your soil medium with a nutrient solution medium. And there's 3 or 4 different sort of generalized techniques. This particular technique is called a nutrient film technique, where what you have is a small amount of nutrient water that flows just over the root level of your plants and allowing the roots to access that without having to grow a huge taproot or anything like that into the soil.
So in here, we're letting the water do all the work, and we're using the water a lot better than if we were in the soil. An example of that is a lot of this lettuce, if it was grown outside in the ground, it's going to take 50 gallons of water to produce that same head of lettuce. In here, we're using only 1 to 2 gallons of water to produce the same thing. So we're using our water a lot more wisely in a hydroponic situation than outside in conventional farming.
So hydroponic basically means without soil. It's farming without the use of soil. So most people probably think it's farming with water, which isn't necessarily correct. Hydroponic farming is just a more efficient, controlled way in a more condensed area. So it has those big advantages compared to your conventional farming.
We start in a product which they call rock wool, and all that is rock. It's been ground up really, really fine and spun in the same form as making cotton candy. In fact, that rock wool has the same texture like cotton candy. And it has no nutritional value to it whatsoever, and we don't want it to. We just want it to hold the seed in the plant and retain water. We start them in those cubes. Then these cubes are transferred into these trays that are notched out for those cubes to flow into. Then it just starts running out into this tray, and it just lies in the water and the nutrient. It's in its perfect environment. It doesn't have to work for anything.
And that rock wool is basically a volcanic rock that's added with some other agents that's spun into a sheet, which has ours have 200 individual holes in them. So we individually hand seed all of those 200 seedlings. And then you take those sheets, you water them in, and you wait for those to germinate. When those germinate, you can see what we'll do is we'll go to, each tray has an individual space for plants. So you'll take the seedling and you'll transplant it into the individual spaces. From there, it's somewhere between, depending on the variety and the time of year, 30 to 55 days before you're ready to harvest. At that point, we come in and you just harvest your heads of lettuce, and we put them on trays and get them packed up into either bulk boxes for restaurants or bulk boxes for us to take to farmers market. Or we do some sales to the community mercantile here in Lawrence, which is kind of our only retail outlet anymore that we do. But for them, we put it all in clamshells and package it for retail sale.
1949 saw a new Agriculture Adjustment Act, extending crop price support and subsidy policies, as well as adding subsidies for the dairy industry, which put farm programs into permanent law. Since then, farm legislation has included expiration dates, which prompts Congress to pass renewed congressional authorizations every 5 or so years.
We can go back, certainly students of history, and you'd really talk about the Farm Bill, which was a Depression-era program created coming out of the 30s and 40s, so that is permanent farm law for the true policy wonks out there.
Like in a Farm Bill, if it passes, then there's potentially as much as a year before the regulations and the guidelines are established, and then it takes a while for producers to gauge whether they're going to participate or make modifications to their program. And then there's kind of that worldwide effect, is, you know, how has it affected supply? Has it caused a change or a shift in what's grown? Is there more corn per se now and less wheat and soybeans because of the farm program? And usually it's unintended consequence, but that's why there's a lot of vetting and a lot of careful analysis, and probably now why there's not a substantial change in policy now year to year, because I think there's a realization that changes may need to occur, but if you do something significant overnight, you could have some unintended consequences that could really disrupt the market situation.
In 1964, we saw the creation of the Food Stamp Act. 1980 saw biotechnologies become a viable technique for improving crop and livestock production. In 1985, Congress passes the Food Security Act. This law added new farm subsidy programs, including the Export Enhancement Program and the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP.
1985 Farm Bill did create the CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program. Before that, there was a different set-aside program where the government was really trying to make sure that supply and demand was met in a different way.
And Kansas was one of the states with the highest amount of participation. And that's simply a program that a landowner would enter into voluntarily, usually 10 years, and say, hey, for 10 years, I'm not going to produce any grain commodities. I'm going to seed this down to cover and receive an annual rental payment to do so.
Its initial intent was to preserve fragile lands from wind and water erosion. Great need for that in the 80s and coming forward. Was really targeted to those soil types and those locations where wind and water had an adverse impact on the soil landscape.
He was predominantly focused on highly erodible lands. So in western Kansas, think the Dust Bowls. A lot of land in southwest Kansas blew away. So we needed to make sure that that sort of land was kind of the highest priority when it came into the CRP program. Other states, there are some areas in Kansas that water erosion may be a higher concern. So those types of lands were protected. If it was kind of flood bottom, river adjacent type ground, they often got bid into the system very quickly.
There's any number of ways to start a home garden. It's really something that you can do almost anywhere. So if you're living in an apartment, maybe you can do a container garden or even some house plants, which I guess we don't often call gardening, but they create some of that same connection.
The beautiful thing about home gardening is that anybody can do it, and what we like to communicate to folks is that, yeah, don't hesitate to think that you can't be a home gardener in any location.
It doesn't need to be a massive undertaking like, plowing up the back 40. Whether you're living in an apartment, a small house, you have access to a backyard or just a balcony. There are a number of ways to get started. If you have a small flower pot, if you want to build your own raised bed, or you do want to do an in-ground planting, there's a variety of ways to get started and a lot of opportunities to grow your own edible crops.
The first thing to know, probably the most important thing, is that there are any number of ways to garden. So figure out what works for you. If you want to grow leafy greens for salads, there's ways to do that, but you need to figure out how to do that. The key secret to gardening is choosing the right plant for the right place. So you want to make sure whatever your situation is, you're finding the plants that will work for you, and also finding something you want to grow. I find some people really love growing vegetables and aren't very interested in flowers, and that's great. Focus on those vegetables. Or if you only want to grow flowers, grow those. There's no right way to garden. Whatever works for you, whatever you love to grow, whatever you love to see, grow that.
Of course, raised bed is a very common way to home garden, and so you're going to find folks that go that route. But if you have a small space, just growing vegetables in containers, can be a real simple way to do that. For the folks that have more space, traditional in-ground garden, it may be their choice.
For good plant production, there are kind of a few principles that are important to understand. Plants need access to full sun. Edible crops specifically probably are going to need somewhere in the in the range of 6 to 8 hours of direct sun. They'll need a good growing medium. That could be a potting mix, that could be soil in your backyard that's been plowed and broken up. It could be growing in a hydroponic system using a soilless media. Regardless, you're going to need access to light, good soil or some sort of growing media, and you're going to need water. Those are kind of the three major components of good plant growth.
One of the most common mistakes we run into is maybe just biting off more than you can chew, in the sense of maybe a bigger garden than maybe you can manage or take on. And so we like to encourage people to start small, to get to know a few plants. Pick out a few vegetables that you like, you'll eat, get to know them, their biology, kind of their life cycle. But start small and learn about a few plants and then grow your knowledge from there. So, just taking it one step at a time, kind of like with anything new that we learn is really important. And another common mistake sometimes we run into helping people with is soil. And just really, it's easy to underestimate how important soil is in creating a healthy garden, backyard garden of whether it's a container, raised bed, in ground, whatever the case may be. So, taking time to learn about soil will really benefit you long term, and so we try to promote that through our services such as soil testing, the things that we offer through Extension.
Well, when the pandemic hit, at first we didn't think it was really going to bother us too much, and then the schools closed, and that was huge. They were all out on spring break, and we got a phone call, we're closing. We're not going back into school. So here we are sitting with a greenhouse full of lettuce and no place to go with it.
When we have lettuce to be harvested, it's got to go out because we got lettuce that's ready to be transplanted in. So we had to keep moving. So we started dumping lettuce.
We had to do something with it. It was ready to harvest. We ended up throwing away quite a bit, but I posted a picture on Facebook. And within 2 hours, I had so many people contact me from food banks and just different areas. We'll take it, don't throw it away. Well, I'd much rather donate it to somebody than throw it away. So we donated to virtually every food bank in the area. Anybody that called and said that they had a refrigerator big enough to store lettuce, we donated. Then Jordan White from White's Food Liner contacted us. If you can put together enough lettuce for a month and make it down to Medicine Lodge and St. John and Kingman, he says, we'll take it. That's what we did. We boxed up a bunch of lettuce and headed south.
And it went over like gangbusters. So now we've picked up grocery store as far as Medicine Lodge, St. John's, Kingman. We were already doing their grocery stores up here by us, but we hadn't gone that far from home until then. So like I said, it closed some doors and then it opened some doors. And we just kept right on going. Then when the pandemic got to where they were keep pulling workers out of the fields in California, no one could get lettuce. So again, we were the only lettuce here in Northwest Kansas for a while, and we were running out. Yeah, for a brief moment, it really affected us. And then on the other hand, it opened things up to where we can keep up again.
When the pandemic first happened, we saw very large negative impacts of the corn market. A lot of our corn is devoted to ethanol use, so when consumers quit driving due to stay-at-home orders and things closed down, we had kind of that double whammy, if you will. Fortunately, as people have went back to work, we're starting to see some traveling. We've recovered through most of that lost demand. And I would just say in general, it impacted corn producers just like everyone else. There was some extra precautions that were taken.
The pandemic has certainly spurred on our lives in different ways and hindered them in others, changed the ways in which we interact with the public through various online means, Zoom and different technology has certainly been a handy tool for innovation in sharing knowledge and connecting with the public. And so I assume that's going to continue. That's been actually an efficient and a neat way to be able to connect.
It certainly hit us at the very beginning. Like I said, we've had a really great relationship with 715 Restaurant in Lawrence, and they would buy greens from us pretty much on a daily basis. And all of a sudden, they shut from March till September. You've got to be nimble. You can lose some of that nimbleness of now I just go find somebody else to hopefully get this filled until I can get back to what we were doing before. Small farmers, small producers, you have to react quickly and you have to go solve the problem. So unfortunately, that was one of the great things about our farmers market customer base. We just use social media tools, Facebook and Instagram type things. Just started taking orders from people over the internet and delivering door to door. That wasn't something that I would have been able to continue doing that much longer, I don't think, because of the labor constraints. But me and Ariel would have to pack 60, 70 orders or something and then deliver them the next day and then come back and do it again. But we made it work. Fortunately, the farmers market worked really hard. The staff and everyone there worked really hard to make it happen, to keep it going. It was still there and it was enough to keep us going.
So cover crops are really crops that are not designed to really be harvested for production but really for protecting the soil and especially in western Kansas, one of the things that we're not fortunate to have abundance of is moisture. And so it's a way for us to preserve moisture and keep our organic matter increased. And so cover crops are becoming more and more popular, and we're seeing more and more producers adapt to the no-till, utilizing the cover crop ideas.
A crop that goes between your cash crops to cover the ground over the winter is kind of the main cover crop I put out. It's also used going from wheat to a summer crop, a fall crop like milo or soybeans. It's also used to help suppress pigweeds.
So cover crops in a layman language is any plant or any group of plants we grow for the purpose of covering the soil and not the purpose of getting harvested. So we will grow it and we'll leave it on the surface to protect the soil. And there are a lot of benefits of cover crops, growing cover crops. It could be improving the soil quality, improving the soil health, reducing the disease pressure, controlling insects and weed suppression. So there are a lot of ecological benefits of growing cover crops.
Well, I guess I think of cover crops typically is what you might grow between cash crop. And when I say cash crops, I mean crops you harvest and sell or use yourself. In some cases, cover crops can also be harvested or used for forage, which also might help bring livestock into the equation, but that's another component of that trying to maximize soil health. During an off season, whereas years ago we had a lot more fallow in our rotation, where you didn't grow a crop for a season to help build up the soil moisture profile. We've kind of migrated away from that and gone to more sort of continuous cropping, or at least rotations that involve more years of crops in a given cycle. Cover crops can come in during the periods between those commercial crops that will grow.
So cover crops are utilized particularly in operations that are focused on sustainability and regenerative agriculture. It's where you put a mix or a crop in the ground to either hold the soil to help with erosion, put nutrients back into the soil, maybe help aerate the soil, but it's utilized to help the overall soil health.
The idea is to hold the soil in place, to increase the organic carbon that's in the soil, basically take up some of the excess nutrients that might be left over in the soil from fertilizer application.
A crop that is planted in ground that is fallowed, it's ground that's maybe going to go into a coarse grain crop like corn or soybeans or etc. But in that interim fallow time, so typically over the winter, a cover crop is planted in the fall. It exists there over the winter, and then in the spring it's either terminated or harvested in some way, and then the crop that they're targeting to grow is planted in behind that. That's the broad concept. Like so many things in agriculture, it starts to take on a lot of different views. I've seen great use of cover crop. At Servitech, we consult on a lot of fields where seed corn is grown. Well, seed corn is harvested earlier than regular field corn is, so that surface is exposed longer than it would be in a regular cornfield. And so I've seen cover crops that are flown on there or land applied with a four-wheeler or something, and that cover crop follows in behind. It protects that surface, so again, reduces the potential for erosion. It has the ability to help preserve moisture because it's either shading the surface or the plant itself is taking up the moisture. And the same with nutrients. It's going to take up nutrients and hold that until it's terminated, and then of course the cycle begins and those nutrients are made available back to the crop that's going to follow it.
So soybeans are a popular crop across the U.S., but Kansas has seen a growing interest in soybean production across the state. You look in the past several years, soybean production as well as yields have increased across the state in Kansas. And the popularity of soybeans, I believe, is because soybeans is such a versatile crop to begin with. It has a large market with a lot of uses for soybean production, and so as farmers, that is something we're looking for. But also, having readily available markets and the demand there with soybean breeding has improved the genetics of soybeans over the years, allowing them to be planted further west in drier conditions or different conditions across the state that you see. That has helped with the expansion of soybeans across our state.
Soybeans have historically been a crop that you didn't see grown much in the western third of the state. There wasn't really an outlet for them, a soybean crush type facility. They are used in a monogastric animal diet, so poultry and pork production would use soybean meal as a component in their ration. Not as much of those sorts of facilities in western Kansas, so there just wasn't many soybeans grown. A couple of things have begun to change though. One is the development of soybean hybrids that had a shorter season of productivity, shorter amount of time from the date it was planted to the date that it was mature, that opened up a window for double cropping principally in that central third of the state of Kansas. So here would be the typical production year. In the fall, September, late August, September, a wheat crop is seeded. That wheat crop grows up until it gets dormant in the winter time. By spring, it starts to green back up, and we're going to harvest that late May, June, maybe the very beginning of July like this year. Immediately following the harvest of wheat, those farmers are coming in and planting a soybean crop. And that soybean crop has just enough season by say October or the fall of that year to mature, because it's a little shorter season soybean plant. Then that ground lays fallow typically over the winter, and there may be a spring crop planted into it, or they may hold it again until fall and start the cycle again with a wheat crop. So it's given some double cropping opportunities that we haven't always had. Growing more soybeans in central and western Kansas allows us to begin to establish more poultry and swine operations. We just don't have many right now, but I think that could change. I think it's on the horizon. Certainly our focus right now is on feedlots and dairies and those ruminant animals. Soybeans don't have as much of a place there, but I think there's a future there for soybeans.
The soybeans are really taking off more and more to the eastern part of the state. Again, it goes back to the farming practices. This year's gonna be a tough year because a lot of times we've seen a lot of double crop soybeans, and double crop basically refers to farmers will put soybeans behind the wheat stubble, so they'll harvest the wheat and then they'll go back into a no-till situation and put soybean into the wheat stubble with hoping that they'll catch some blessing from Mother Nature and get some rain, and then a good August weather where we get some moisture, which the rains this summer have definitely been nothing but spotty. We keep seeing the increase of double crop acres go in. Conventional farm soybean acres, they're fighting for acres from corn. And then this last year with the price of grain sorghum, we lost some probably acres of conventional soybeans to grain sorghum also.
Corn is a pretty good crop for, especially on our operation, to diversify it and spread out some risk. We're able to plant it sooner, as a result harvest it sooner, so that kind of spreads out our fall and spring workload. Corn also, we can plant it about 30 days sooner than you could with milo or soybeans, and as a result we're able to take advantage of some of those early rains that sometimes we get that maybe sorghum couldn't. And so that's also why sorghum can be a fit too, because it can take advantage of later rains. We're just trying to manage our weather risk, and corn has been a really good option for that. Corn is a little bit riskier of a crop in this area. If you have a corn crop failure, you always have the option to harvest it for silage. It's never going to be a total loss. There's always options to find some profit there.
Corn is utilized in nearly every area of life. We utilize it in our backgrounding yard, and it's fed. We supplement ethanol yards with Inogen corn. You see it being shipped down to Mexico for tortillas by rail, etc. Like, corn is in everyday life.
Corn is an incredible photosynthesis machine. It's one of the most efficient ways we have to produce calories from sunlight and carbon dioxide and water, which is why it's such a wonderful crop plant and popular to be grown with Kansas farmers and farmers all over the world, really. It's a great crop plant to grow at really high densities to produce a lot of food.
Corn's an interesting crop. Corn has seen as much investment in the development of its germplasm as any planted row crop on major acres as any there is out there. The development of hybrids that are more resistant to drought conditions, the ability for them to be grown further west or to extend that corn belt further west, probably one of the major advancements in the last 10 to 15 years. And so because of that, we see corn grown further west here in Kansas, not necessarily always under the influence of irrigation than we ever have. It's been great for Kansas. It's allowed us to continue to grow a feedlot industry. It's allowed us to grow and develop a significant dairy industry. All of those are positive developments, and you can only haul milk so far. We're going to see some tremendous benefit from that. But part of that is because we can grow corn and other forage crops that feed that dairy population. Corn's got an exciting future. The rest of that are the additional uses for the product. Certainly, number 2 yellow corn, a staple in livestock diets. Corn silage is important in ruminant diets. Ethanol and other biofuels type activities are critical, and those continue to grow here. All of those things have been beneficial to the farmers who are growing corn and have the ability to have more market outlets and potentially more demand for the product that they produce.
Over the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen corn acres double in the state. All of that virtually being on dry land acres that couldn't, support corn in the past, but due to better water efficiencies and technology, we're just seeing more corn acres.
Corn really is a crop that, because of the genetics and what's been brought available to the producer, the consumer, the hybrids, becoming more and more stable in production and yield.
Cover crops to hydroponics and home gardens, Real Ag has covered a lot of topics. We hope that you enjoyed this season of Real Ag. As always, you can check out previous episodes of Real Ag on SmokyHillsPBS.org. From the producers at Smoky Hills PBS, this has been Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.